This show is sponsored by idealworkspace.com, which promotes a healthier way of working through their adjustable standing desk. Check out their latest smart adjustable standing desk at altizen.com, ALTIZEN.com. Welcome to Analyse Asia, the podcast dedicated to dissect the pulse of business, technology, and media in Asia. In this episode, I speak to Haoliang, Assistant Secretary General from the United Nations in the Responsible Business Forum 2017 on Sustainable Development. We discuss the key goals for Asia Pacific and how to align the different stakeholders and measure their impact and success. Hi Haoliang.
Hi, how are you, Bernard?
I'm well. Thank you so much for taking this interview off your busy schedule.
It's my pleasure.
Yes, and I am now actually in Marina Bay Sands, and actually this is really my first time, and I'm very honored to actually have Haoliang, Assistant Secretary General for the United Nations and Director, Regional Bureau to Asia and the Pacific. And it's actually because there's a Responsible Business Forum, and you all want to talk about the Sustainable Development Goals with UN and business and different stakeholders from government agencies and NGOs as well. So I want to start to first talk to you to get to know you better. How did you start your career?
My first education was in China, actually, was in engineering. I graduated from Tongji University with a major in bridge engineering. Later on, I went to the United States to re-educate myself. I got degrees in management science and also in international relations. So I did a lot of internships during my studies, and one of these internships turned into a short-term position at the UN. And then that's how I started. It took me many years to establish myself, but now it's over 20 years I've been working for the UN.
So specifically across your career in UN, what have you done before you get to your current position?
Yeah, I started at a very junior level, right? And I worked my way up, over the last 22, 23 years. And initially, I worked in the field, in the country offices. In fact, half my career was in the field assignments. I worked in Kazakhstan, twice. First as a junior officer, later as a UN representative. I also worked in Iran, in East Timor, and in Pakistan as UNDP deputies. And later on, I went to New York. I did my stints as the Deputy Director, Regional Director for Europe and the Commonwealth of Independent States, the former Soviet Union, and then became the Director of UNDP for Asia and the Pacific. So that's what I've done.
It's interesting, right, because you've been on the field, you see the first-hand what are some of the most interesting issues, and I think some of these regions are pretty difficult, and you came from Shanghai, China, from what I understand, before we have this interview. I guess one thing I want to learn is, throughout your career journey, what are the interesting lessons you can share with my audience?
No, I think it's very interesting. This is very important question, I think, for people from Asia, right? Because Asian people try to work very hard, right? Don't talk a lot, and just wait for bosses to recognize them. But I think that's actually, not going to work. In an organization such as the UN, whose organizational culture is Western, it's quite Anglo-Saxon in that sense. So as Asians, I think it's very important. First, you clearly needed to work hard, right? You needed to establish a good, professional reputation, right? But at the same time, you needed to understand the organizational culture, that you needed to let people know your capabilities, right? What you can do and what you have achieved, in your different positions. And that means really speak out, right? When an opportunity presents itself. And also you needed to network. And in Chinese we say you cannot ask for Buddha's help once you need Buddha's help, right? It's the same thing, right? You needed to build a network. And also I think the lesson learned is that you have to build a network of all kind of colleagues, your supervisor, your peers, and your subordinates. You cannot just only try to build a good relationship with your bosses, right? That's not good enough. It's not going to work. So many lessons: work hard, network, and speak out.
That's pretty good advice for I think Asians out there, because we don't tend to express ourselves very well, and I think moving on with us actually being more and more educated, I think this is something that we will eventually evolve towards. But today I want to talk about something much more really interesting. I think it's regarding the Sustainable Development Goals and the United Nations role into helping to shape these goals and getting different stakeholders to be involved. I think what I want to basically start off by saying I'm sure everyone of my listeners know what the United Nations are. I just want to ask, the first question is, can you introduce the United Nations current coverage in Asia and the Pacific, and what's your role and coverage as the Assistant Secretary General to the UN?
Sure, thank you. I'm working for an organization called the United Nations Development Program, and in short, the UNDP, right? It's the UN's largest development organization, and we cover 36 countries in Asia Pacific. We have 25 field offices in different countries. Some of them cover multi-country presence. In addition to UNDP, the UN development system as such, has many other agencies. Some are well known, such as UNICEF, UNESCO, WHO, right? And some others, right? Our work focuses on promoting agenda of sustainable development. Right? That is really, nobody should be left behind in terms of, in poverty, in a marginalized situation, right? Living in a condition that's environmentally not sustainable, and so forth. So I think this is essentially what we try to achieve, working with governments, with private business, with NGOs, and with academia and so forth. Right?
There's this way of thinking about sustainable development. I mean, I probably know John Elkington's model of the triple bottom line, and I'm sure that there are a lot of different other models of sustainable development. I just want to get it, because you're on the ground, you deal with the real issues, and you talk to the real stakeholders that are involved in the issue. How do you define sustainable development from your perspective?
In fact, the governments of the world, the membership of the United Nations, made a very good definition of this in 2015 through what's called Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17 such goals. But in language that we can understand, I would say that can be categorized into 5 Ps. One is for people, okay? A set of goals that address the well-being of people, right? Such as health, education, right, inequality, gender equality, and so forth, right? So this is about people's well-being. And then another set is about prosperity, right? The economic growth, right, the sustainable consumption, and some of the fundamental economic growth issues that are critical for the well-being of people, right? So this is about prosperity, right? And then you also have a set of goals about the planet, right? The planet, so the environment goals, climate change, biodiversity, and a lot of issues that go into this set of goals, okay? And then you also, and some other issues that I didn't mention but are important, are urbanization, for example. Right? People understand urbanization is a big trend, right? That goes into the issue of prosperity, right? Consumption and so forth. Another set of issues related to peace. There's so many conflicts that are really, hurting people today, right? Have root causes in lack of development, for example, right? The poor governance, the corruption, right? The lack of care by officials, for their citizens and so forth. So a lot of these kind of issues are dealt with, as under the rubric of peace. Then the final P is about partnerships. To achieve the 17 goals, right? And there are 169 sub-goals, right? So no governments can do this alone, right? So the partnership is about working together, the whole society, the donors, the developing country governments, right? The private sector and the public sector, and so forth. So we need to work together. So these are the 5 Ps that define the framework for sustainable development today.
So that's interesting. Right. And since we are in the Responsible Business Forum,
right,
I want to ask a little bit deeper.
Right.
What kind of problems are the people within this conference are trying to tackle within Asia? I mean, we talk about poverty, right? Bringing the unbanked online. We can talk about water, the access to clean water, sanitation, I think,
right,
and also prosperity, you mentioned it, and of course dealing with war, with the recent issues that are happening in Myanmar, for example. What are the key problems that you all try to address, but in a more specific way in Asia?
Yeah, this forum we are here to organize, in the next 3 days, is called the Responsible Business Forum. Right? It is about businesses' involvement in sustainable development. Right? It is about engaging private sector and business in general to participate and contribute to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Right? And what do we mean by that? And typically, when we talk about the business, okay, we know they are creating jobs, right? They are, paying taxes, and they are doing corporate social responsibilities. But what we are saying is that, together with our partners, is that the private sector engagement in sustainable development can go deeper. We, for example, not only should focus on CSR activities, which means business helping with communities with access to water, sanitation, right, and micro business and so forth. But what we are saying is that business actually should make sustainability part of their business strategy. That means when they do financing, right, when they do purchasing, right, when they make investment decisions, right, they consider long-term contribution to the well-being of society, to materialization of basic human rights, right, and also for the long-term sustainability of the planet, as part of their business strategy. And we say this is good for business because this has something to do with, for example, in things that people can understand, reputational issues, right? Now, a lot of global movements focus on companies that do not practice sustainability principles, or they violate labor, human rights, for example, right? So I think making sustainability part of the business strategy is good for business. It is good for their reputation, good for customer loyalty, right? Good to keep loyal employees, in companies that have upbeat, sustainability strategies and so forth. There's so many aspects we're talking about, but in short, this forum is about engaging business, in development.
You mentioned about business engaging in corporate social responsibility, CSR, and I think that one company that always comes to my mind is Apple. I think in the early days where they are actually having the workers in China in Foxconn factories, right? They have issues. I think they have gradually moved towards educating those young workers. They're building better work conditions, and I think they also, on their own selection of the materials in building their products, they have actually gone through, I think, about a 7 to 8 year effort, and I think now they're getting into proper standards.
Yes. Another example is the garment industry in Bangladesh.
That's right.
Right? The labor standards, working conditions. We see more and more of this. And one of the issues, specific issues we try to work on through these discussions at the forum is the question of financing for development. Right? Because estimates show that you need trillions and trillions of dollars every year to achieve SDGs. Right? And this is not the kind of financing the governments, the public sector financing can provide. So we're talking about really how private and the public sector can work together through innovative means of financing, such as blended financing, right? The grants and the loans coming together, through impact investing, right? You're focusing on really social environment impact of the investment decisions, and the green bonds, and Islamic financing even, right? Using really, we have a lot of countries in the country practice Islamic finance principles. How can we, turn billions into trillions, right? And in ways that really, focus on the long-term well-being of society and the planet. So these are the issues we're also going to talk about today.
I think what is interesting to me is you mentioned about businesses, you mentioned about UN's role towards it, and also NGOs and governments. I guess one interesting question I want to ask is, how do we actually align these different stakeholders? Because I think it's like, for example, tackling poverty is a pretty complicated issue, right? There are different perspectives to that. How do you get the different stakeholders within this forum to actually say, okay, this is how we're going to set the goal, this is how we're going to make sure that all of your interests are aligned, for example?
No, it's a very good question. I think, as I said earlier, to achieve this agenda of sustainable development, you need a partnership. And that takes the governments, the international organizations such as the UNDP, and the private sector, the society, and so forth, right? But each has different role to play, but they need to be aligned, right? For governments, for example, they needed to be the guardians of the Sustainable Development Goals, right? Because it is the governments who agreed to achieve these goals, right? So they needed to keep a focus on this. But they can also help create a policy environment for businesses to invest in a way that is supportive of sustainable development. For example, right, they can have policies that encourage investment in certain fields, such as renewable energy. And they can create conditions to support micro and small businesses, right, to include the people who are normally not banked, right, who do not have access to business opportunities through government procurement policy, for example. Right? And the government can also be the enforcer of laws and rules and regulations, right? And so forth. So governments have roles to play, right? The UN, for example, also has roles to play. For example, we should also be the guardians of the SDGs, right? The UN is the guardian of universal principles, right? We can also be the platform to bring different partners together. We have a network across the countries, across the regions in the world, right? We can bring good practices from one country to learn lessons and apply these lessons elsewhere and scale them up. So we can be the broker of knowledge, right, and be the facilitator. We can also work with partners to work on issues of policy, right, to create a conducive environment, policy environment for business engagement in development. And of course, business, right? Business we talk about, they can do so many things, right? We did studies in the Philippines, for example, which mapped the investment of 70 big companies to see how they support SDGs. The study showed that these 70 companies have invested $850 million that can be regarded as contributing to SDGs, right? So we have different roles to play, but we need to work in tandem, right, with the same goal.
Yeah, that also comes to the next point, right? How do you actually measure the performance and the impact to these goals? I think maybe it's kind of trying to quantify them in that sense.
It's a very important question, okay. For the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals in general, there's an indicators framework of 230 indicators. Okay. The governments have said, okay, these are 230 indicators that will measure the 169 sub-goals, right, and the 17 overall goals. Some of these have a very clear methodology and the baseline and the means of collection. Right? Some of them have qualitative indicators, but are not very clear, baseline, for example. And some of the indicators have not even a framework on how to define and collect the data. So this is a big picture issue. But for business engagement, of course, then there's also a question, how do you measure the business's impact, right, on sustainable development? This actually is a major research agenda that UNDP included, is working together with academia, right? For example, how do you certify businesses that have done a good job, right? So what indicators goes into defining whether businesses are doing well? So there are a lot of work is going there, okay? For example, Singapore, I think, stock exchange is going to make sustainability reporting a mandatory requirement for companies that are listed on the stock exchange, for example. So that will force all of us to think about, okay, what is the measure of success, right, for business engagement in sustainable development. So I don't have a definitive answer, but a lot of people will talk about this in this forum. There are specific discussions about it. And so let's keep an eye on this.
I thought I just had one more question.
Sure,
How
please.
do you see the role of technology in helping you to deal with these sustainable goals? Do you see it in more positive, or do you see that maybe there needs to be more caution to put technology to use with these goals?
I think we are generally very optimistic about the role of technology in development. I think the recent experience of development have shown that technology has been a multiplier, and a facilitator of solutions. There are worries about the impact of technology to marginalize, certain groups of people. But overall, I think it has been very positive. You see countries so-called leapfrog, right? The stages of development in terms of mobile technology, for example. Right? Many countries skipped the fixed, telephone set to go to mobile, right? And in terms of energy, many countries now still don't have access to energy, right? So I think in Asia Pacific, there's 1 billion people who do not have access to sustainable energy, right? In principle, so you have opportunity to skip the grid because the investment of a normal grid is very expensive, right? In harder-to-reach area, you cannot go there. You have renewable solutions that can, offer, a solution. So I think there's so many aspects that are positive, but there are worries, right? For example, displacement of people by artificial intelligence, by robots, right? So, but again, experience have shown that these disruptive technologies create new opportunities. So I think we need to look at this again in totality.
I guess in a more holistic way, in the way you're thinking about it as well. I just have one last question before we go. Sure. Where do you see the development of these sustainable development goals go in the next 2 to 3 years? Where do you think the direction would be heading? Is it more towards thinking about tackling prosperity, tackling and bringing unbanked, or trying to build better environment, or even could be climate change as well to the agenda?
Yeah, I think where things will go, will be influenced tremendously by what we're seeing in the world, okay? And the people are thinking very deeply now about what's going wrong with the world, right? We have unprecedented number of people, living as refugees, 65 million people, right? We have more than 200 million people who do not have jobs, right? We have billions of people today who do not have access to energy, to clean water and sanitation, right? And we see the rising of violent extremism, right, in different countries, in different regions, right? So people are asking, okay, when the world, economy has developed significantly, we have seen unprecedented level of prosperity, right? We have seen unprecedented decline of extreme poverty across the board, right? But we also see rising inequality, and all these phenomena are described. So why, right? So I think people are asking these questions, and people see, sustainable development, right? That is really a more equitable, right? More inclusive development, right? As a way of solving some of these, difficult challenges. So what I see is that there will be more and more consensus about the issue of inclusion, about the need for sustainability for the future generations. Okay, I will see more convergence on resilience, building resilience to deal with the shocks, that we're facing, whether it's man-made or it is natural disasters. So that's what I see. Really inclusiveness, sustainability, and also resilience.
So I'm going to come to the closing, and thank you for your insights, Haoliang. Can you recommend, in closing, I want to ask 2 questions. Can you recommend a book, podcast, or something that helped you in your work or personal life?
I don't know. I think I have not really read a lot of books, ashamedly, But I've been reading a couple of books recently, not about my work, but about life, I would say. We're all from Asia, how do we deal with education of children, right? It's something that's always on my mind. I have a very young son, who I think is quite talented, but also quite rebellious, right? So how do you deal with that, right? Because from Asian parents' point of view, we want children to listen to us. Why cannot just listen to me, right? I have the wisdom. I know what's good for you, right? But the children have minds of their own, right? And they have their own personality, So how do we understand them and channel their, energy, right, to the positive growth? I think something that I pay attention to, just because of my own situation, right? And I'm traveling a lot. I'm not at home, so I'm very worried about his growth, right? So and I can see that forcing him to listen to me won't work. So that's why I'm studying.
So you're actually reading a book on educating our children.
So how to deal with the gifted and talented, children. There are quite a few books in this field.
That's interesting. Well, in the same line of thinking about education, I thought that there is a pretty interesting topic to think about as well. I would probably ask my last question.
Sure.
How do my audience find you?
I am present on social media. I have a Twitter account. I also have a Weibo account, and I'm on Weixin networks, of course, right? Yes. WeChat, right? Networks, And but the UNDP itself, in Asia Pacific, we have a very strong media, social media presence, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, of course. And for this Responsible Business Forum, there's a specific Twitter handle called responsible_biz. So you can, your audience can really find us, on social media quite easily.
Sure, and I'll put that onto it. You can find me at Bernard Leong or at bernardleong.com, or you can subscribe to us at Analyse Asia, ANALYSE Asia. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Acast, TuneIn, and of course Google Play in the US market. If you have any feedback from me, tweet to me, and of course, if possible, give us a 5-star rating on iTunes, and that will help us to be discovered easily, or recommend us with a star on Overcast.
Thank you.
Most importantly, Haoliang, thank you so much for giving me this time and having this interesting conversation with you.
It's my pleasure. Very nice talking to you. Great. Thank you.